All right, everyone, here we go. Chapter 12, Ratings and Audience Feedback. Let's take a look at the history of how we've gotten to where we are today. It starts off in the 1930s when the Cooperative Analysis of Broadcasting, or the CAB, collected data on network listening in 35 cities across the United States using the telephone recall method. What the telephone recall method was that the company would make phone calls at different times during the day to various homes, and they were selected at random from the phone book, and those that answered the call would be asked to recall programs that they had listened to. In other words, what shows they had listened to over the previous evening or the previous several days or what have you. It wasn't necessarily checking to see what they were doing at that particular moment. That didn't come until this company came along, the C.E. Hooper Company, doing what was called the telephone coincidental method. And that was more focused on trying to pick up on what people were listening to right at the very moment of that phone call. So the company would call a person at random. They would answer, "Are you listening to the radio?" "Yes." "If so, what station or what program are you listening to at that very moment?" So it was another sort of strategy in terms of trying to figure out what people are listening to when they're tuning in to the radio. And it was seen as perhaps a little more accurate in that it wasn't relying rather on people's memory to try to remember what radio stations, what programs they had been listening to over the previous evening or the past couple of days or whatever. In 1942, the A.C. Nielsen Company connected a mechanical device called the Autometer to the radios of randomly selected samples of people. What this would do is it would kind of make a recording of some code using kind of a scratch method to be able to denote what programs, what stations people were listening to. So it could reveal how long the radio set was on and to what station it was tuned into. This was a technology that Nielsen moved over to television in the 1950s as well to monitor how people were consuming television. In 1949, the American Research Bureau, later called Arbitron, used yet another data gathering technique. This one, not quite as technologically advanced. It's the diary. This would be basically what you would think of like a diary that you would keep for your personal use, except it was to journal what people were listening to or what people were watching. So you'd have a book and as a viewer, as a listener, and you would be asked to write down what you were watching, what you were listening to on a particular time and a particular day. One of the advantages of the diary was that in addition to monitoring what people were watching and listening to, the diary also asked for people to put down basic demographic information, male, female, age, that sort of thing. So the diary was able to get a better sense of not just what was being watched or listened to, but by whom. The technology of measuring devices continued to advance. The Storage Instantaneous Autometer, or the SIA, would send information directly from the autometer through phone lines to Nielsen computers. This prevented relying on delivery of the recorded medium to be sent back through the mail and that sort of thing. So it was a much quicker way of being able to gather viewer and listener data. Then in the late 80s, the people meter was connected to the television set and automatically recorded the channel and the time, but the advantage here was that it also allowed a user to input a code to identify himself or herself, and people with codes would already have certain types of information in place with Nielsen, such as their age and their gender and certain other demographic information. So in a way, this was a method to try to replace the diary in providing much more instantaneous ways of measurement of both what was being watched and by whom. To this point, mechanical devices were not collecting demographic information. Now, there's pros and cons to the people meter. The pros: it avoided the issue of people not filling in diaries. If you had to write down every time you turned on a radio or television, every time you turned it off, what channel you were watching and all that sort of thing, it's a task that, it's not a hard task, but people being people, they forget, or they decide they're not going to do it a particular day, or, I'll put it in the book later and get things wrong, and that sort of thing. It also avoided the issue of people not mailing back diaries, and it was better able to determine exactly who was watching content. Now, there were also different disadvantages to the people meters. They were expensive to install and maintain, and that was a cost that was absorbed by Nielsen. So it was a pretty heavy investment for them. Children's statistics were hard to gather. For whatever reason, children would not necessarily be as faithful in putting in their codes into the people meter. So it wasn't very clear what children were watching many times. And people meters only monitor at home viewing. It did not capture what people were watching when they were out and about, or if they were at work, if they were at the sports bar watching a game or something like that. Those things did not get measured with the people meters. Now, what comes along to try to combat that is the personal people meter, or what's many times called the portable people meter, the PPM. This can measure both in-home and out-of-home listening and viewing. Basically, it's a device about the size of a pager that people would keep with them. So if they were at home, if they were at work, if they were walking around, if they were shopping in a store or something like that, the device could detect what they were watching or what they were listening to. On broadcast stations, there is an inaudible tone that the PPM can pick up, and it's encoded with certain information so that the PPM can detect what particular show or what particular station that someone was in close proximity to and presupposably watching or listening to. Marketers are becoming increasingly dissatisfied with traditional viewing data and are searching for engagement measures that show how likely the consumer was to respond to an ad placed within a TV program or online. So one of the big issues with traditional ways of measuring audiences with ratings and shares data, and we'll talk more about the differences between those a little bit later on, is that they would measure people's involvement with a particular station or with a particular show, but it didn't necessarily tell the advertisers if people were watching their advertisements or listening to their advertisements and responding to them, which is what advertisers want, especially as technology becomes more and more advanced, where many people are trying to skip or bypass commercials in one way or another. This becomes a much more important deal to advertisers to know that what they're spending their money on is actually going to be effective. So there are various ways that ratings and shares numbers and different types of gathering information is being done to try to appease that. Still not a perfect process, but we've gotten a little bit better at that, and we'll talk about one of those methods a little bit later on. But there's still that overall sense of knowing exactly what people are engaging with when they are watching television or listening to the radio. Plans are in the works for various companies to measure online entertainment consumption, and there are a few out there that are doing it now, but there's not necessarily a standard. There's not an apples to apples sort of way of comparing one platform to another, kind of like how there is right now with radio and television. So while the measurements are out there, they're all speaking different languages, if you will. They're kind of interpreting data in different ways. So it's a little more cumbersome to try to make your way through that material. And as an advertiser, trying to decipher what the data are telling them and trying to make decisions based on that data. Now, let's talk about the ratings process. First off, television viewing. Nielsen Media Research draws two different types of samples to measure TV viewing. First off, there's the national sample. That is what is used for the Nielsen Television Index, or the NTI. It's designed to be representative of the entire U.S. the entire U.S. population, I should say, across some 6,000 small geographic areas and at least 12,000 households across those areas. Now, the exact number of Nielsen families today has grown from that 12,000 number. Nielsen doesn't release exactly how many Nielsen families there are right now, but speculation suggests that it's somewhere in the 25,000 to 35,000 household range. For the local market, the Nielsen Station Index is the report to look at, and Nielsen first divides the country into more than 200 television markets. Within each market, sample sizes vary by market, but are usually in the range of 1,000 to 2,000 households. In this case, the local people meter, or the LPM, is used to gather local sampling data in the top 50 markets. So it's basically the same technology as the personal people meter, gathering information on data that are of most interest to local markets compared to just overall data based on particular programs and things like that. In smaller markets, though, diaries are still used. So by and large, as the technology for personal people meters continues to get more efficient and people are more connected, we are seeing certain markets move towards using PPM. Somewhere between the top 50 and 100 markets are currently using PPM. And then for smaller markets, diaries are still being used. 4 times a year, information is collected from all TV markets in the United States. This happens in February and May and July and November. These periods, you should recall this term from previous chapters, sweeps is what these are called, and the local stations use the results to set their advertising rates. So once a quarter during those months, there is a much more intensive attempt to gather data on what people are watching on television, and that data are collected, and that information is what television stations use to be able to say to advertisers, we have this many people that are watching our shows at these particular times. Therefore, we believe that advertising on our stations should cost this amount of money. Nielsen provides 3 measures of program viewing, and these data basically have different sorts of meanings within the industry. There is measuring the live viewing, how many people are watching a particular show at the exact time that the show is being aired. There's also live plus same day DVR viewing. So perhaps if you've got 2 shows as a TV viewer that you want to watch, they're on at the same time, you record one while watching another live, then you go back later in the evening and watch the show that you recorded. They're able to track that data. And they're able to track that data with DVRs up to a week after a show originally aired. So that's another measurement that they use, live plus 7-day DVR viewing. The C3 rating is the rating of the average commercial minute, including live viewing and DVR playback within 3 days. So this is that way that Nielsen is trying to help the advertiser to narrow down whether people are actually watching commercials. So it gets pretty detailed where they go minute by minute to see if people are actually engaging with the material that is coming at them. And this, at least as of right now, is the most interesting data to advertisers, and advertisers are buying based on those sorts of ratings. Now, in terms of processing the data are gathered on a nightly basis and made available on the next day. Diary information, of course, because you have paper involved and sending things through the mail and things like that, that takes a lot longer to process. But it is amazing how much information we're able to gather from viewers with internet technology, phone technology, wireless technology with the personal people meters and things like that, to determine how many people, as an estimate, watched a particular program the night before. In reporting the ratings, the NTI contains data on the estimated audience, and that is divided into relevant demographic categories for each network program broadcast during the measurement period. So it basically will show that, say, 10 million people watched a particular television show, but out of that 10 million people, this number of people was females 18 to 49. This number of people was men 25 to 54, and on and on and on. They can break down into various different types of demographics. They can also break down in terms of race, in terms of geography, going market by market, and sometimes even getting broader or more specific than the particular market. Let me explain what I mean. The NSI has data from various geographic areas, and these are the three areas that they will kind of zero in on when it comes to television viewing. There's the metro area, where most of the population in the market lives. So if we take the Raleigh-Durham-Fayetteville market, for example, the metro area for that market would basically be Wake, Durham, and Orange counties, because those are the three cities that make up the triangle: Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. The designated market area, or the DMA, is where the stations in that market get most of their viewers. So in the Raleigh market, that covers a good swath of central North Carolina, including all three counties in our CCCC service area. And then there's the total survey area, which is a portion of the market that surrounds the DMA. Best way to explain that might be if, for those of you that are in Chatham County, for example, if you are watching a television station that broadcasts from Greensboro, Chatham County is not part of the Greensboro television market. But if you are watching a Greensboro station, you would be counted in data as they relate information in the total survey area, because Chatham County is part of the Raleigh-Durham television market, but you're watching television out of Greensboro. Same thing goes for some of you folks in Harnett County that may be watching a television station that's broadcasting from Wilmington. Harnett County is not part of the Wilmington television market, but if you're watching a Wilmington station, you would get counted in those TSA total survey area numbers. NSI audience estimates include numbers broken down by time periods and by programs, so you can determine when people are watching, what people are watching, and it's all broken down by Nielsen. Some terms and concepts in TV ratings, and we're going to talk about three main ones here in this section. First one is households using television, or HUT. Represents the number of percentage of households that have a TV set on during a specific time period. So say there are 100,000 households within a market that have a television, and during a specific time, 75,000 of them were actually watching television at home. So the HUT number would be 75%. It would be that 75,000 out of the 100,000. Okay. So households using television is a benchmark that we're going to see that's going to play out within a certain type of measurement that's used in just a moment. First off, though, let's talk about the rating. The rating is the percentage or the proportion of all households with a TV set watching a particular program at a particular time. So this is more the idea of the percentage of people within the population of an area that are watching television, watching a particular show. Let's stick with that 100,000 number. Say there's 100,000 households in the Raleigh-Durham television market. And out of that 100,000 people, 10,000 of them were watching Channel 5. So the ratings number for Channel 5 at that particular time would be 10%. That would be the rating for Channel 5 at that time. You take the number of households watching a program and divide it by the total number of households in the market. Now, this is where HUT levels come back in. When we talk about shares, the share is the total number of households watching a particular program at a specific time divided by the total number of households using a TV. So in the example that we've been using, say, 100,000 households in the market have a television. Out of that 100,000, 75,000 of them were actually watching television at a certain date and time. Okay. And you've got 10,000 viewers that were watching Channel 5 at that particular time. So the share number would be 10,000 viewers watching Channel 5 divided by 75,000 households that were using television at the time. So, you do the math, 10,000 divided by 75,000, that's somewhere around maybe 17%. So the share numbers are generally going to be larger than the ratings numbers, but the ratings numbers are based on the entire population of a market versus the share numbers, which are representative of those watching a program respective of the number of people that were actually watching television. And there's different reasons that you would use those different kinds of numbers. But the main thing to know is rating is the percentage based on everybody in the market. Share is the percentage of people relative to how many people use a particular medium. In this case, we're talking about television. Now, let's move on to radio listening. And one thing I want to note here is that you see the book reference Arbitron in the way that they're doing audience measurement for radio. Arbitron was the main company that did radio measurement. Arbitron, though, was acquired by Nielsen in 2013. So just so that you have that in mind. Diaries cover a 1-week period beginning on a Wednesday, running to the next Wednesday, and the data include stop and start times for listening, station frequency and call letters, where the listening was happening, whether it was at home, at work, in the car, wherever, shopping in the mall, wherever they happen to be, and basic demographic information of the listener. And PPMs are used to measure somewhere between the top 50 and top 100 radio markets, while everyone else that is reporting to Nielsen or Arbitron are using diaries. Processing the data for radio, submissions are disqualified if they are received late or certain errors or unreadable information. So it's very much not just kind of gathering the data and taking the data as it stands. There's verification that happens to ensure that the data they're receiving are correct. The radio ratings report various sections that look at geography, area market statistics, transmitting and programming logistics, and ratings based on demographic data and day parts they're all included in this radio ratings report. And that is information that radio stations get to help them to determine how many people are listening to their station, at what particular times of day, and that sort of thing. Some terms and conditions in radio ratings. The big difference between the way that numbers look in radio compared to how they look in television is going to be based on what it is that they're measuring. The basic unit for most television ratings is the household. So we were talking before in our examples that we were basing things on 100,000 households within a certain television market. Okay. And keeping in mind that households can have any number of amount of people in them, the average tending to be somewhere around 2.5 people per household. It's kind of the given standard there. So we're measuring households in television, but in radio, we're measuring individual persons. Okay. So television ratings are based on households. Radio ratings are based on individuals or on persons in and of themselves. So the ratings formula for radio, instead of dividing by the total number of households, you're dividing by the total number of persons. In ratings, that's the total number of persons within a particular market. With share, it's divided by the total number of persons in a market that are actually using radio. The cumulative audience, or CUM for short, is an estimate of the total number of different listeners who listen to a given station at least once during the time part under consideration. Most of the time in radio, we talk about this on a weekly basis. So many times a question will be raised as to what a station's weekly CUM is. So that's the number of unique sets of earlobes that are listening to a particular station, and usually the standard is if they've listened for at least 5 minutes at some point during the week. Those people are counted and are considered as part of the weekly CUM. Another rating that's important to radio is average quarter-hour persons, AQH persons for short. This estimates the average number of persons who are listening to a station within a 15-minute period. And these are kind of hard, fixed 15-minute periods, so it would be from, say, for example, top of the hour to 15 past the hour, 15 past the hour to 30 past the hour, and on and on and on throughout the broadcast day. And the goal here is to have as many people as possible listening for at least 5 minutes at a time during those hard fixed 15-minute intervals. So if you as a listener are tuned into a radio station and you tune in at, say, 10 past the hour, and then you tune out at 20 past the hour, then you're going to be counted for 2 different average quarter-hour statistical periods. You'll be counted for the one from 0 to 15 past the hour, and you'll be counted for the one at 15 to 30 past the hour, because you listen for at least 5 minutes in both of those time blocks. So this is a way that in radio, they try to show measurement to potential advertisers to say that people are sticking through and listening to their station more than just hopping on for a minute or two and then hopping away and just flipping through the dial. So at this point, we'll take a break and we'll finish up the chapter with part B, and I'll see you over there on that video.